Hey y'all, I'm Reese, and welcome to Making Meaning. Making Meaning is a podcast by the Cohere Collective here to help guide you along your path to make meaning in a way that makes sense for you. This week, we have our first return guest, Nicole Adams. Nicole was actually the very first guest I ever had on the podcast, is a very dear friend of mine, and is my roommate, and has been my roommate since she was a guest for the first time. So this is a really cool full circle moment of the podcast being out for about 2 years now and getting to return. So I'm going to start calling any episodes where we have returned guests Making Meaning Ouroboros episodes. So this is our very first Ouroboros episode, and I hope you are as excited as I am. If you didn't listen to the very first episode with Nicole, you will not know that she is an extremely talented artist, cook, writer, human. We met in college, and we're still here. If you have just discovered the Cohere Collective, please subscribe to the YouTube channel right here. You can also leave me a like, drop a comment down below. You can also find the Cohere Collective on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Threads, but I'm not really posting on Threads. But all of those things are all at the Cohere Collective, and if you want to know even more, you can find us online at www.thecoherecollective.com. If you would like to follow me on Instagram, you can do so at Reese Brown. And if you would like to follow Nicole, you can find her at Nicole Oesterreicher. So let's all take a deep breath and get started. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Reese.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Today's a good day because I really don't have much planned.
Nice. Yeah, perfect time for us to sit down and talk like we never do ever.
I know. That never happens.
Never. Okay, so first thing, thank you for being the first return guest on Making Meaning.
I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited.
I'm a fan.
Thank you. Our first guest that we ever had was the wonderful Nicole Adams, and now repeat guest, you're the first one. And it's been about 2 years, which is
It doesn't
wild.
feel like 2 years.
It doesn't.
I remember I was asking you before we sat down, like, when actually was that? And we were like doing the math. And
The meme with the math, like,
no,
going...
that's actually what I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
But it's, like, we hadn't been living in this house very long.
No.
We were pretty fresh out of college, like, hadn't been settled. It was a totally different time, it feels like.
Yeah. Really and truly. So, I want to follow up on that, but before we dive into it, tell me one thing you're grateful for right now.
I think random, but, like, the sunlight in this room.
Oh, yeah.
And the fact that I'm coming up on my 1-year anniversary with this guy. And it actually had 2 plants in it, my birds of paradise. And so there's another pot over there with my second one. And the fact that I've kept them alive is also what I'm grateful for.
I love that. Well, also, it's so funny that you mentioned that, because in the first episode, one thing that I think was like a huge thing that I still think about for me was you talking about how much light inspires you and is important to you.
You're right. I guess I'm kind of weird when it comes to that.
I don't think it's weird. I think it's lovely. But like when you go on walks and you like watch the light, how it comes in through the trees. And so the fact that that's still like a part of who you are, I think is really cool.
Yeah, I find myself working in this room a lot. I think a lot of the time just because of the sunlight.
Yeah.
It just feels nice.
Giant truck just went by.
Yeah.
No, it does feel nice. And it's like the room in our house that gets the most natural sunlight, which is really nice.
Yeah. It's funny to live in a house with so many windows, but I've never thought about it. They have to be facing the right way.
Yeah. And even like the courtyard only gets light at a certain time of day, and all of our other windows like we're in this weird spot where we're actually kind of blocked from a lot of sun.
It's weird. Like, I wouldn't have thought that, but that's, I guess, why I'm grateful for this room.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
So, talking about it being about 2 years since we've last recorded, and we've lived together through that time, and we were like fresh out of college, and now we're not. We're like young professionals in, well, I don't know how professional.
Professional's a loose term. Could mean a lot of things.
Yeah, but I think on the outside, people would consider us young professionals. Like, that's the phase of life we're in.
Yeah.
What have those 2 years been like for you? I guess just generally, however you react to that question, but also transitioning from being a student in school into being a part of the working world and like living on your own and like kind of doing the adulting thing.
Where to begin? It's funny. The first thing that I immediately think of is like, it's been about 2 years. Mm-hmm. Whatever I say now, 2 years from now, I'm gonna be like, she didn't even know.
Yeah, yeah, true.
So that's like the first thing that I think about. But with that being said, like, it's this huge like growth spurt time of life, and I do feel a lot more settled in it, and so I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah.
But as far as like what's changed, a lot. I mean, even this house has changed. Looking around, like thinking about, you know, our roommates have changed, our decor has changed, and I feel like it's kind of matured with us, and it's kind of like the physical representation of that growth.
Yeah.
But outside of the house, I mean, to think about my work life, I don't even think I was dating Eli at the time.
No.
Which is strange. 'Cause that
No, that was, I mean, you didn't, if we're going from our first interview, you wouldn't have met Eli for like another 8 months.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that feels like it's been forever now, but it
Yeah.
obviously hasn't been. I'm in a totally different place at work. My food Instagram has just gone off to die. I need to bring it back. That's disappointing.
So funny.
I've let them down.
You've let all of the Nicole's Eats fans down. As a fan of
I'm
Nicole's...
still taking photos and doing nothing with them. I
You know what? As a fan of Nicole's Eats, I would love to see it come back. However, I think that is such a... Like, you never wanted that to be, like, a business or a company, and it's like, if it brings you joy, great, keep doing it. I would love to see it, but if not,
you know, it's
don't
funny.
worry about it.
It does, but then sometimes the actual posting and making sure I have the right restaurant or whatever gets kind of annoying, but I think I just need to, like, go back to the basics, post the picture, and let it be.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, that is what people want to see, right? It's just your food. It's Nicole's Eats, not Nicole's Plugs.
I know,
specific
but now
restaurants.
there's this thing called TikTok.
Oh my god. TikTok, like, wasn't a thing when we first recorded.
I honestly don't know. Like, was it not a thing then?
It obviously
it
was
probably
around.
but not what it is now.
Right.
And
because I wasn't posting on TikTok.
I hadn't even
Cohere.
posted like a fun TikTok myself. That was one of those things where I was just so intimidated by the platform.
Yeah.
It took me so long to get on it, and then once it took me so long to actually post something. God forbid somebody I know sees the content.
Right.
And that algorithm's not in my favor.
No.
Everybody you met once on the street sees it.
It's true. It's true. So that is actually so interesting to think about how we've changed, right? Because obviously we have, but also the landscape of stuff around us has changed so much. And like I just feel like the world moves so much faster now. Like, obviously it's an understood thing that like 100 years ago change happened way less rapidly. But I'm like, even thinking about our world in the last 2 years, like politically, socially, like in a post-COVID kind of world has changed so much, so quickly. Yeah. What is being in, like, you personally in your life are in such a period of change, like that's just the nature of our age group, but also the world changing so much. How do you like engage with change?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like all the stuff you've been talking about, like, that inherently changes us. Like, when our environment changes, when the culture changes, like, that changes us. And it's one of those things, I don't remember the actual term for this, but it was so interesting. I remember learning this in my sociology class in college, where the example she gave was what students wear around campus. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, you know, culture tells students what to wear, but on the other hand, what the students wear informs the culture. Yeah. And it's a mutual thing. And there's really no beginning or end. I don't even know if you could consider it this circle, but it's this thing that's like constantly feeding each other. Yeah. And so I guess there's a little bit of that here. And there is a lot of change going on. Our good friend and roommate is no longer a roommate, which is tragic.
Yeah, it is really tragic.
We have just a lot of change going on socially with our mutual friends, whether they're in the next stage of life, doing this, that, the other. Of course, there's always our own families, that kind of thing. So, I mean, unless it's something I'm really not excited about, I'd like to say that, like, I don't know if welcome change is the right word, because like nobody's like, hey, the door's open, want to come change some things in my life and let me not know about it. Like, no.
Want to shake things up a little bit?
No. But with that being said, it usually is a sign that there is a period of growth, which I try to think of in those terms, like, as an optimistic thing. Yeah. So obviously there's things that like Sophie moving out is on the surface sad. Right. But, you know, obviously the two of us will focus on things like her happiness and her future. Exactly. And like, is it ideal? No, but like change is good. Yeah. You know?
Totally.
Most of the time, change is good.
I agree. So, to go back to what you were talking about, like you were saying, focusing on the optimistic side of change. I feel like, I mean, we know that naturally human beings tend to kind of fear and like have apprehension around change a lot. That like change is just hard for human beings to deal with. So when you get to a place where you know change is happening, how do you change your mindset to focus on the optimistic side of it as opposed to focusing on like the fearful, oh, we're going to have to do stuff? Like, well, what's that like for you?
I think sometimes it's what I would call second reaction. Something happens and it might take you by surprise, take you off guard, and you know, like you said, your instinct is to react in probably a like not great way. Yeah. You're either going to be upset about it or stressed out about it or whatnot. But I think that, you know, you can't get down on yourself for that kind of a normal reaction. And so taking that second time around to try and focus on the positive, I think you should give yourself a pat on the back. Because I do think that there's a lot of people still who might like time and time again continue to wallow. And so if you can give yourself enough grace to, you know, feel whatever it is you're feeling, but then second time around think about, you know, who this is going to benefit or what good could come out of it, I think that is doing your job as a human to try and do your best.
Yeah, totally. So doing your job as a human is like trying to look on the bright side of things. What else would you consider part of our job as human beings?
Our job as human beings, the first thing I think primarily is like to love ourselves and to love others. I would argue that that has a lot to do with, you know, just our existence in general. Yeah. It's all built from love, built to love, whatever you want to call it. But besides that, I think that even when I was talking about like, oh, like, well, how do you find that glass half full? And I think that it is a way of thinking that is actually quite creative, because if you're not willing to see what's not in front of you, you're not going to be able to come up with something positive out of darkness. But a way of creative thinking to me is essentially problem solving, and change is sometimes a problem on the surface level. Yeah. And so you being able to not like talk yourself out of something in a delirious way, but there's always something, and we can always like create something that is a solution or that's helpful, or I don't know. But I think that creative thinking helps with that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that oftentimes, I mean, I had this whole other episode with Vincent Andrews, who's Jessica's husband. I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to it yet, but he was talking about his research on creativity and how like we can make it more accessible to people.
Yeah, that was super interesting, like in education.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the times we don't give ourselves credit for being creative people, like just not us, like you and
No,
I.
you're
but,
right. I mean, you could not even try as a person, but you are inherently creative because of the capabilities of our mind even.
Right. And it's like, to me, that is inherent in what being a human being is creating something new, adding to the world around you.
Totally. And it's funny because a lot of people don't get the like outward stamp of approval for creativity.
Yeah.
Like if you're not in the arts, like even at my job, everybody in my industry, which is advertising marketing, is kind of in a creative industry. But with that being said, you still have these labels of like, I'm on the creative team at my agency.
Right.
There are people who I work with who are not on the creative team. Does that mean they're not creative? No.
Right.
But I think sometimes they forget that they are because they don't have that label.
Yeah, totally. Well, and even from a very young age, like we get this stamp of like, oh, well, they're a creative kid, or oh, they're not. And it's kind of one of those things that's like, even if you have like a math-minded brain and not an art brain, math takes a lot of creativity. Like you were saying, the like inherent problem solving and critical thinking, like you have to be creative to think outside the box. And how are new formulas found and created except for creativity?
And I think so much of it is also in the application. Like just because you're not creating some new formula, which is also a great path, that doesn't mean you're not creating something.
Yeah.
Because it's how you use tools to create solutions.
Yeah.
And so if you're someone who's using this, algorithm to solve a problem at your workplace that they were struggling with, or it made it more efficient.
Yeah.
But like that's fantastic. That's such a creative use of time and space, and I think it's the people who think in that way that sets them apart in their career, because so often if you think about it, that kind of thinking is so outside the box. You have to be the one to think about it. Nobody's going to ask you to do that because they don't even have the words or the capabilities to think about that.
Yeah.
And so what sets you apart in your career is being able to tap into the creative problem solving, because then you're doing something that nobody even else thought was possible, thought to ask about, and you're presenting something that is giving your team really great value.
Yeah.
Because of your creativity.
Absolutely. Well, and even in that, like you're on the creative team at your job, using you as an example, I'm sure that there are so many like systems and like operations that you still do every single day. Like being on the creative team doesn't mean you get to like waltz into work and just like dance and paint.
Absolutely.
Like
I'm using thesaurus.com. That's not creative.
Right.
That's looking up a list of words because I can't think of something.
Yeah. So it is so interesting how labels impact how we think about ourselves, but also like going back to what you were saying with the like culture impacting humans and humans impacting culture. It's almost like, does life imitate art or does art imitate life kind of question.
Oh gosh.
I know.
I hate questions like that. Reese knows this.
Yes. But it's almost like, well, does the label impact the way we think about ourselves, or does the way we think about ourselves impact the label that we're given?
And there is something there. So that, I mean, I'm joking. I mean, I do kind of get annoyed if I get too in the weeds with questions like that. But,
Sure.
I mean, they exist for a reason, and it's true. It's the whole, like, nature, nurture thing, right? Like, if someone tells you you're a creative person, or if it's in your job description, you're going to remember that sometimes.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And so I think it does make an impact, and that's why I think these affirmations, especially things that people wouldn't expect, right? Like, say you're someone who's like a good-looking person. If someone tells you you're good-looking, like obviously like that's maybe nice to hear, but it's something that is kind of on the surface. But when somebody notices something in you that you don't obviously notice in yourself, I think that is like the biggest compliment and like motivator that you can give somebody. So someone who doesn't automatically have that label as a creative person, like say you're working in, finance and you're a manager and you tell somebody on your team that what they did was a creative solution. That's such a compliment that maybe is not like, that's outside of the norm, and it's adding value to that person's life and their sense of self.
Totally. Well, and the labels can also be really positive sometimes, right? Like, I know I label myself a writer, and do I write every day? Absolutely not. But
that's so true. I mean, I call myself an artist, and I haven't painted in so long. I'm supposed to paint today, actually.
You'll paint today.
I haven't gotten there yet.
It'll happen. But it's like, there is something so motivating to me when I'm like, no, I am a writer, that actually makes me want to write, as opposed to being like, well, I'm not a writer because I don't write. Like, changing the framework around that too, that it can help be a motivating factor to, be that type of person that you want to be.
It matters how you talk to yourself.
Yeah.
It really does.
It totally does. So, on that, how do you talk to yourself?
Oh, I say the most wonderful things to myself. I'm a princess. I'm the queen of my own life.
I mean,
I'm amazing. I'm going to be a chef one day and an author, and I'm going to shop for Trader Joe's and eat the world's best ketchup in the best, most fabulous 5-star hotel.
I'm going to be a chef and an author.
And are those things even going to happen? Who knows?
So funny.
But the fact that I tell myself these things, I think, can't set me up for anything but success.
Why do you think that is? Because I think some people would say you're actually setting yourself up for delusion. You're actually... I don't think that, right? I totally agree with you. But I think there are some people out there that are like, don't lie to yourself. Even though, in my mind, I totally agree with you that even if it doesn't happen, thinking about that and having something to strive for is really powerful and helps you today, even if you don't end up getting there. But what makes you so certain that at least actively trying to talk to yourself like that and shooting for that is setting you up for success?
Well, I think it goes back to like how you talk to yourself and your perception of yourself. That's where I think everything begins. Everything that you interact with the world around you, whether it's how you speak to others, whether it's what you accomplish in your life, I really do think is a lot of a reflection with how you feel about yourself and your sense of your own worth. And so saying things like that to myself is my way of setting me up for success. And the thing about, delusion and that kind of thing, totally valid. And I think that it is this kind of double-edged sword where, think about a parent who tells their kid, you can be anything when you grow up. Is that actually true? No. But it's a good lesson for kids.
Right.
Because as you get older, you understand that even though there are some things that are not possible, the you allowing yourself to think that anything is possible is setting you up for success. I know that royalty is not in my future. I live in the States. They're not going to marry a prince. If I did, would I even be considered royalty? Probably not. So, it's just not in the cards, right? But with that being said, words have whatever meaning you really want to give to them. And so, I'm my own princess. Does that mean I'm royalty? No. But I am my own princess.
I kind of love that. Words have whatever meaning you want to give to them. Talk more about that.
I have always been someone who's really fascinated with language, and the connotation of language. To some people, because of their own experiences, they might have a totally different perception of the same word that somebody else does.
Yeah.
It's kind of, this might be getting off track, but I think about this sometimes where, if I'm looking at this green plant over here, and Reese is also looking at this green plant, are we seeing the same shade of green? I genuinely don't know. I don't know if we will ever know.
I don't think there's any way to prove
Exactly.
it. Yeah.
And so, in a less tangible way, like, we're all giving our own meaning to things. And so language is just an extension of that. Words have different connotations, positive, negative, and they change over time. Like, I mean, anything. Think about the word, oh gosh. I don't know.
Or even, like, going back to the other thing, like, creative.
Yeah, creative.
Right? Like, the root of that is creating something or creator. We all create things, but you wouldn't necessarily think that, like, a construction worker is creative, but they are literally creating a building or, you know. And so it's like the connotation around that word has been removed from actually the start of what that word was intended to describe, to denote.
And I mean, I know you're very interested in poetry. You find that interesting. I honestly cannot say the same for myself, but there is something to be said for playing with language and knowing that one word could have 7 different meanings, and those different meanings could emote different feelings in a person.
Totally.
And how they're grouped together can give you a totally different feeling as a reader and as a writer. Obviously, writing is my profession, and so I care about this probably more than the average person. But it's my job as the person writing messages for brands and in advertising that the general public sees. It's not their job to be writing stuff like that, but it's my job to anticipate how they're going to feel when they read it. And so me thinking about the connotations of language really deeply and how those words pair together is so important in order for me to get the right feeling across to the person I want to be seeing that message.
Totally. Well, and even thinking about, like you said, how it can change when you string different words together. Like, tragedy. It's like, oh, well, that was a tragedy, of course. That, like, evokes all of these sad things. But then you think, beautiful tragedy. And it's like, okay, now we're, like, somewhere Shakespearean. And, like, even just adding that one word, though, it's like those are 2 totally different things, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's so fascinating. I also want to go back to something that you said about how we attribute meaning to so many things and that language is just an extension of that. Obviously, the name of the podcast is Making Meaning. And I do think that inherently human beings make meaning whether we're consciously aware of it or not. And I totally agree with you that language is just another way that we do that. And it's a way that we do it with other people because it's the vehicle we have to communicate, to connect. As someone who, like you said, your profession is words. Words are your profession. And trying to not guess, but like deconstruct and approximate how other people are going to view the meaning of what you create. How do you, I don't know, think about that? And like, as you are literally on this end of like, how does this product or brand come across to this person? What does this brand now mean to this person because of words? Like, how do you think about that when you're working? And I don't know how much you might. But...
Well, I will not mention the name of my actual client, but for example, one of my clients is an airline, and it's a pretty well-known airline, and the meaning, even a word like nose could associate something like nosedive, which is a plane crashing. Words like crash, words, I mean, anything that could potentially have this feeling of not safety.
Right.
Is something that you would have to really be careful to avoid. And I'm not giving very good examples, but there are some really like everyday words that just wouldn't work for that brand.
Right.
Because somebody would hear them and it would subconsciously trigger something negative.
Right.
that could potentially make the brand look bad.
Yeah.
But if one of my other, food clients said the same thing, nobody would think twice.
Yeah.
And so thinking about the context of what that brand is and what they're doing is incredibly impactful, and it's so imperative to think about. And the other thing would just be, the target audience.
Right.
Like, who is this audience? What is their mindset? What are their beliefs? What is their age group?
Yeah.
The same message to, 60-year-olds will not hit the same with 25-year-olds.
Yeah.
And so that is something that plays a huge role. And then the other thing is history. So if there was an event or an incident that happened, recently that was, picked up by the news or something, that's something that needs to be on the forefront of our minds when we're talking about, maybe we shouldn't say that. Maybe we should be more sensitive about this kind of topic.
Right.
That kind of thing.
Totally. But it's just so fascinating to me because you inherently are, like, even though you're a writer and your job is to write, you are also practicing so deeply, like, psychology, sociology.
A lot of psychology.
Like you said, history. Like, there are so many... There's, like, a car chase happening on our street. That's scary. I
Mission
hope everyone's
Impossible.
Okay. Yeah, like, actually. But there's actually so many other things that are going into what you're doing besides just writing. And I oftentimes think that that's true of any profession. And right now we're kind of, like, diving into language and writing.
I totally agree. Skills without smarts is not helpful.
Right. Well, because even thinking about, like, going back to the example of a construction worker, sure, maybe their expertise, the way yours is, like, writing and definitions and grammar and that kind of thing, is, like, understanding different building materials and, like, how to, like, what kind of wood works best for this, or, like, what kind of foundation is this needed. But I bet absolutely along the process, they're thinking about, like, the visual aspect of this. What if I'm building a hospital? Oh my gosh, there's, like, actually a car chase happening.
I don't know what's happening, but there's another police officer.
That is crazy.
This intersection's crazy.
This intersection is crazy. That is something that has not changed.
Nope, the accident every week.
Every week. But, like, I bet, like, building for a hospital is so different than building for a restaurant, than building for a home.
Yeah.
Like, the way that you think about that, of course, the principles of, like, sound construction don't leave the same way the principles of, like, grammar and diction don't leave when you write. But, like, switching the context, like, they're also using so much of your experience of a human being to connect and create
totally
something
right.
for other humans.
And I think 9 times out of 10, no matter what our work is, we're doing it for humans. And so having that human first mindset, I think, makes any company so much more successful. And you were talking about, different kinds of construction for different buildings. And you mentioned restaurants. And I think that is a fantastic example of, designing with a human in mind. I recently read a book by Danny Myers called Setting the Table, who owns and runs restaurants primarily out of New York City, but also Shake Shack. And he talked, this is his latest venture. But he talked so much about what he calls enlightened hospitality. I would encourage anyone to read it. It's a fantastic book, even if you're not interested in owning your own business or restaurants. But he talks so much about the details of how different things will impact a human. Whether it's the art on the walls, or in some of these things you don't discover until the first few months
right.
of the restaurant opening. But listening to that human's feedback is essential for that restaurant to continue to be popular. Because if, for example, the floors are loud and it's a nice place where maybe a woman is going to be more likely to wear heels, and then it's clinking and it's creating this noise that's really not appealing to the ear, you know,
That
that
is so
might not even be something that the
fascinating.
customer is registering, or it might be something that bothers people who are dining, who aren't the ones walking around.
Right.
Little details like that go back to the human and their experience of the restaurant. It doesn't matter how pretty it is if it's not serving that person's experience.
Right, because there's totally that thing that people have where it's like, I don't know, I just really like this place. Or like, I just love the like feeling of this restaurant. Like your favorite restaurant, like it just has this feeling, and could very well be because of a series of small things like that.
Totally.
That's-
Like a soft material and a quiet atmosphere
Right.
and a nice color. Like all those little
Yeah.
details add up even if you're not registering it.
Well, and I know for me, water bottle's in the way. One of the most like really tangible things in this restaurant thing that is so important to me is lighting.
Totally.
Like, I hate being in a restaurant where I'm like, I cannot see the person across from me. But also, you don't want to go into a restaurant and it's like bright
Yeah.
at night. I mean, if you like go to a brunch place and it's bright and sunlit, like that's lovely. But if you're going out to a really nice, like maybe romantic dinner,
But again, knowing your audience, knowing the context of
Yeah.
the time of day and the occasion for that meal, like it's the same thing. I mean, all the same principles, whether it's writing an advertising for someone or building a restaurant. The context, the person, the audience, like they're all the same questions that we're
Yeah.
asking.
So, why do you think it's important then to be asking those questions? Do you feel as though it really is like just everything does come back to being a human being, and that is like the important thing?
I think it does, but I also think it depends on what kind of person you are. I mean, if you want to be the kind of person who, whether you're an employee or the owner of a business, if you care about the human experience, then putting the human first is what's going to bring you success. If your primary goal is, you know, money, and you're not thinking about the experience of somebody, there's a chance your business could be really successful and, you know, you just lucked out. But there's also a chance that, you know, after some success, it's going to crash and burn because the human's not being served at the end of the day. And people
Yeah.
get tired of that.
Yeah. Well, and it is so interesting to me too, thinking about this from a more like economic viewpoint, and in like so many small business or all business owners, right? It's like, well, if you're running a business, we all need money to survive, right? And if you're running a business, even if it's like your baby, your child, at the end of the day, it also has to make money in order to stay viable.
It does.
And I think so often you hear stories of people that like, oh, you put money ahead of the person, but it's like actually by putting the human first, that will inherently support you financially too, right?
Totally. I mean, investing in people, whether it's the people you're serving, in that case, you know, your customers or your clients, or the people within that company, your servers or your people on the creative team. Like, investing in all the people is going to bring you success. And it's okay as a business owner to have financial goals be one of your main priorities. They should be in order for your business to
Right,
survive.
for a business.
But that those two things, you know, should be working congruently. Like,
Yeah.
they shouldn't be constantly butting heads, people or money. Like, finding a way to make them work together, I think, is the goal. But even thinking about my company, you know, the man who owns it is a fantastic person and he cares about his employees. Does that mean he doesn't care about the business succeeding? Like, no, like, but we all want to succeed together.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and even thinking about that, it's like that's probably why the business does succeed so well, and like why people
Yeah.
stay there for so long, because it's also that like owner mentality. Like they care about the company because it
Yeah.
feels you have that ownership around it.
Feeling like somebody cares about you, your success, your life outside of your job too.
Yeah.
It does so much more than, you know, an extra $5 ever would, you know?
Yeah, so true. Okay, so we're nearing the end of our time, but I want one more question before I wrap up with our final question. To bring it back to the big picture of making meaning, how do you think your concept of like living a meaningful life has changed or stayed the same in the last 2 years since we recorded?
I think the biggest thing is the question of what are your priorities? Because the things in our life that, you know, are going to give us the greatest, most valuable meaning are the things that should be probably our highest priorities.
Right.
So whether that's your family, your friends, your health. And I think that, you know, the average person, if you're writing down like, oh, the top 5 things, all those things are going to come up. But it takes a lot more practice and skill, I think, to, in the average day of normal life, to actually notice those things.
Yeah.
It's really easy to accidentally or unintentionally deprioritize one of those big things in your life.
Totally. Well, and I think it's really easy to like say, oh, this is really important to me, or this is a core value or like a key facet of the life I want to live or the person that I want to be, but not have your daily habits, behaviors, choices, mindsets actually align with those things, right?
Yeah.
Like,
and that's
how
not
do you
an
bridge
easy
that gap?
thing to do. And I think the awareness of it is important. Like knowing that you're a human being who stuff's going to come up, like something at work is going to make you cancel dinner with friends or whatever, and that's going to happen. But on the whole, trying to align yourself with reminding yourself, you know, what are my priorities? How can I keep those priorities? And how can I like really cut out time that I'm spending on other things? Like I've started spending a lot less time on social media, which is kind of an obvious one, but it's given me more time to do other things that are more important to me.
Yeah, totally. Okay, very last question, because this is what we always end on. What is one word to describe how you feel right now?
Quiet. It's so quiet in our house on the weekends.
It is, isn't
And
it?
there's also something to be said for another meaning of that, which is similar to like a feeling of peace.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I love you. I love our home, and our home does have a feeling of peace, and you give me a feeling of peace.
You too, Reese.
Thank you so much for the time, for being the best friend, and making me a better version of myself.
Love you.
I love you. Thank you all so much for being here today, and a huge thank you to Nicole for being our first return guest. Again, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, give us a comment or a like, and you can find us anywhere, all at the Cohere Collective or at thecoherecollective.com. Right now, I am feeling peaceful, even though it's been a really busy week, and it's a really busy week this next week. This feels like a nice moment of reprieve in between all of those things, and I'm glad to be spending it with you. That is all I have. I hope you feel like you are living more coherently, and until next time, love.